So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time this evening to come and join the July meeting of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance in Wales. I'm Dawn Lyle. I'm one of the volunteer organisers with Wellbeing Economy Wales, and I also run an organisation in South West Wales called For the Region. Personally passionate about the idea that we need to reframe what our economy is for, and we need to start to build a wellbeing economy in Wales and around the world. And being part of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, which is a global network of groups like this and of people and organisations all over the world, we're really part of a movement of progressive places and nations and countries who are leading the way in thinking about what does a wellbeing economy look like, what does that mean, how is it different from what we have now, and how can we make new ways of living and working and organising society more accessible and more meaningful and relevant to a broader diversity of different people. And here in Wales, we are a national hub of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and very lucky to already have a piece of legislation enshrined in law in the form of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And we know from talking to other wellbeing economy hubs around the world that many countries and places are working on that first, trying to lobby governments to put wellbeing, enshrine it in their legislation and in their governments. So we have the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in place, and a number of other reasons to feel quite positive about what Wales is already doing to build a wellbeing economy. We have some levers for government to do that and other things that government can't do. But when we talk about a wellbeing economy, really we're talking about what do we value, what do we measure, and what do we think about in terms of what the economy is for. And really it's a move away from a sort of obsession with GDP as the only measurement of success. So moving beyond GDP to think about other things that we can measure, other things that we can value. And for us, that's the well-being of people, the well-being of local places, and of course, the well-being of the planet. And we're really inspired by the donut economics framework. And some of you joining the call today have enrolled on our donut economics, localizing the donut series of conversations. And this is part of that series of meetings and events, trying to think about how we can think about an economy that provides a social foundation for everybody, but also operates within planetary boundaries in that safe and just space for humanity. So donut economics is a really useful framework inspired by a book written by Kate Rayworth, a framework for thinking about the economy that really aligns well with what we are talking about when we talk about a well-being economy. This evening we wanted to bring together people and organisations and communities from across Wales just to try and find out who's doing what in the form of community action, community-led initiatives, and what we think of as building a well-being economy from the ground up. I think that there is a real limit to what governments can do and even what councils can do in the current system, the current economic system, the current global context, and that actually a lot of the changes that we want to see and how we're going to build resilience and well-being has to start from a local level. And not only that, but actually it's at the local level where we perhaps still have agency and where we have some influence. And I think one of the challenges as a kind of community activist and trying to make stuff happen at a local or hyper-local level is that all too often it can feel sort of pointless and futile in the context of the kind of scale of the challenges that we're facing, whether we're talking about the climate emergency or the inequality of our economic system or the mental health crisis or the cost of living crisis, these massive problems. Do you sometimes feel like I do, that these small things that we can do at a local level feel somehow pointless and not enough? For myself, the antidote to that is recognizing that we're all actually part of a huge movement, not just in Wales, but around the world, of people trying to do their best to make change happen in the places where they are, starting, you know, outside their own front door and seeing what they can make happen. And part of that is reconnecting us with that sense of community and, you know, rebuilding or exposing the social fabric again, recognizing how much we all depend on each other and how much we all have to offer each other. So it's an inspiring landscape to work in, and I'm hoping that this evening's discussion will shine a light on some of the great stuff that you guys are doing across Wales, and hopefully you'll tell us about some of your initiatives and experimentations. Now, I'm using that word experimentations because no one has this all figured out, and I'm absolutely certain that, like we are For the Region, many others of you are trying different things, experimenting with different ways of engaging with local people and involving people in your community and trying to make things happen in new and different ways. And those new and different ways don't always work. So hopefully in this discussion this evening, we'll hear from groups and initiatives across Wales and from people, individual sort of activists and campaigners and organisers, about the sorts of things that have worked and are working well, and also perhaps share some of the challenges and some of the obstacles and see whether we can connect around ideas, advice, top tips for each other about what works, what doesn't, and perhaps share some of the struggles as well as some of the motivating things about working in communities. So building a wellbeing economy from the ground up, that's quite a broad topic for discussion. We're thinking about initiatives and groups and projects that are perhaps tackling kind of one of three or all three interconnected pillars, and those could be broadly considered environmental projects, social projects, or economic projects, or an intermingling of all those things. Those are the sort of three pillars of a wellbeing economy. So really interested to hear what people are doing and hopefully shine a light on some great examples that we can all learn from and share more broadly across Wales. So these discussions tend to be very much co-produced, and I'll be inviting colleagues and partners and friends in the room to put your hands up and be ready to tell your story and share. I suppose what we'll do to kick off the meeting is perhaps hear from maybe 3 or 4 people, see if you can self-nominate. You can start raising your hand now. Tell us why you've come along tonight and perhaps a little bit about what you're hoping to get out of this evening's discussion, why this feels important to you, and yeah, key questions or issues that are in your mind as we enter into this discussion about community-led action, building a wellbeing economy from the ground up. So I'm going to be looking for 3 or 4 hands, 3 or 4 people who'd like to kick us off this evening. Tell us why you've come along, why this conversation feels important to you, and what you're hoping to hear or share in this evening's discussion. I'm looking for some waving hands and see who will kick us off this evening. I don't mind these long, awkward silences. I sometimes think it takes an awkward silence for someone to come in first. Right, Michael. I can see you waving. Thank you very much. You can unmute yourself and tell us, why does this conversation feel important to you and why are you here?
Sorry, I only waved because nobody else was. I was kind of, but you've just mentioned the 3 pillars, and I know very little about your organization, so I didn't realize you were using them. Now, I wrote a document 30 years ago that was called Objective 2000 that used the 3 circles of 2000 to illustrate the red, blue, and green of what I call ethics, economics, ecology, the 3 E's. And I invented that document to resolve all the problems indifferently by putting ethics and ecology up first and running economics in as a third, you know, somehow to get away from economics as what I call the bar stool, the single pillar that believes that it can do everything, into the Venn diagram where ethics, ecology, and economics are, you know. And it was lovely to hear you say that that's now being used as 3 pillars. I've always used ethics, not social. and it's probably got more to do the pretty nature of having 3 E's. But curiously, that document was never used for the group I wrote it for. The brother of the chairman of that group was the chairman of Gwynedd County Council. He used it in the county. It became adopted. The county then submitted it to the Welsh office as their funding application program, saying, oh, look, we look at the environment and the people as well. The Welsh office was so impressed, they adopted it. It then became a 20-year strategy in central government, which nobody ever told me about. And it's because local authorities still cheated on the economics that the Future Generations Act was then written, because nobody knew how to use the document that I'd written. It's curious. So if we're going full circle now, or full 3 circles, and getting back to that lovely moment, that's really nice. Now, that was based on my own papers on economics that I was writing 43 years ago, which I call radiant economics. And so I'm a little bit sort of stand backish about donut and circular economy and all these things, because they still use the fiat economy, and there are all sorts of aspects to them. And so what I'd like to throw in, I can't say ring now, having been talking about 3 rings, what I, up for discussion, if you like, is that if you use a radiant concept that says, I'm the center of all my values, everything that happens around me is in the gift economy. You do the cooking, I'll do the washing up. Whatever those things are, we just get on with it. That's gift economy. Now, the more we can extend that, there is no financial function. We're not paying interest and inflation and so forth. So then out in the community, you begin to barter, because everybody, it's a second layer. And the layer beyond that, where you begin not to know people, but you still want to get the job done without interest, inflation, and so forth, is the LETS layer, the local exchange trading systems and so forth, tabulated barter, our dollars, call it whatever you will. But I was the founder of LETS in Britain about 39 years ago for exactly those kinds of reasons, to create third layer. And we didn't have first and second layer. Then you go into credit unions and so forth, and business to business currencies like the Kellen that's just been launched in Wrexham. Then way out there somewhere in the world, you have gold or international currency exchange and so forth. Now, my perception of this is that our own work in that gift economy is probably, let's say, on average, 40% of everything we ever do. In the next layer, in community, we're picking up the swapped vegetables, somebody's repairing my bike, I'm fixing somebody else's roof. We're doing another 30%, and it's all in that exchange world. We sort of, oh yeah, no, I'll done you a favor, you do me a favor. It's not gift, but it's still giving, it's still without financial recognition. The next layer out is the layer of community, is the layer of inclusion, is the layer of, did we look after the old people? Are we dealing with mentally handicapped and so forth? So you're only extending the pragmatics of localization by another 20%. But this means if you've got 40% done at home, 30% in the community, 20% in the county, you've only got 10 left, which means the country has dealt with 100% of all its needs. So a country would then be defined as the smallest region in which every single person has satisfied all the needs of every single, within a world capacity, which is 1 acre per person. You see, so I now call those cluster, community, county, country, continent, and beyond, the 5 Cs. Yeah. So there's 2 thoughts, one on the 3 E's, one on the 5 Cs. This is working practice that I never went public on until last week. I was asked to draft a document for the World Council of Ethics. I've just put both those ideas out there, and today I've got my first 2 replies, one from Germany and one from Indonesia, saying, wow, yes, let's do it. So not something I've ever gone public on until now. So
well, yeah, fascinating discussion there, Michael, and thanks for kicking us off with such thought-provoking comments. I haven't come across radiant economics, so that's brilliant. I think part of what we're talking about, isn't it, is that we are often using this word in Wales at the moment, maybe beyond, resilience. How are we creating resilience at a local level? And I think that speaks to what you're saying there about kind of unhooking from fiat economics or unhooking from the kind of global money system. How much can we do for ourselves within communities? How much can we meet our own needs and become self-reliant? And I think of this sort of work of involving people at the local level in making good things happen as really fundamental to building kind of local resilience in the face of these major shocks and challenges which are increasingly coming down the line. You'll have to catch up on some of the previous conversations we've held in this forum. In particular, we did hold a meeting about local currencies and the opportunities for sort of embracing cryptocurrencies as a force for good, and we heard from the guys behind the Kellyn, and so it's all very much part of this discussion. So let's see how other people respond to the thoughts that you've put out there. Great to have you with us. Who will go next? Who will tell us why tonight feels important to you, why you've come along, and what you're hoping to hear about or talk about this evening? I'm looking for any waving hands there.
Rhiannon's waving, Dawn.
Is it a wave? Yes, Rhiannon. Yes, please come in.
Okay, so I'll pick up on it. I came tonight because I like to keep up with what this group's thinking, because they've done some really exciting stuff. I work with Dawn and Zoe with their Community Rail partnership, and I like to think that the groups in Wales are part of the Living Well Locally idea. That's the sort of thing that happens because they're there. I'm working on a project at the moment with another partnership because I've got an opportunity to bring them together with a community-led tourism initiative and to help them tell the story of their place better and help the people in their community to shout loudly about the things that are good about their place, which for a time has suffered from other people's perception of it. So I think those sort of things are important because there's so much talk about levelling up and all that kind of thing. And most of it's just talk and no action, that it's good when you actually get engaged with something at a hyper-local level where people have a pride in their community and they just need a little bit of help and facilitation to talk about it. So yeah, those are the sort of things. And I like the way this group does both. It does bigger things and the smaller things because they're also important. Bring them all together. So that's my bit for tonight.
Great. Thank you, Rhiannon. Thanks for coming back again to this group. And I will talk a bit about the shared vision meetings that we've organised in sort of hyperlocal communities around Wales. If there isn't, if there's time in amongst other people sharing what they're up to. But yes, we'd love to talk a bit more about some of that. Who else will come in and tell me why you've come along, why this feels important to you, what you're hoping to hear from this evening? Clive.
Greetings, yes. So yeah, Clive Witchwood from Focuswell in Cardigan, Abertavy. Really, it is fundamentally a learning curve, learning opportunity, because we're only very new, and we've got a huge amount to learn. And as far as I'm concerned, as has already been basically discussed, the only way forward that I see is through that hyperlocal approach, taking the action. We can't wait for that, as has been described, that slow movement by, say, large corporations or by governments, etc., to deliver what needs to be delivered. We need to take basically the ball by the horns and do in our own local areas. And so as we do, we're going to be making all sorts of mistakes. We're going to stumble, we're going to do things, but we all need to come into these forums, pitch in and learn from each other, what needs to happen next.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that, Clive. And hopefully we'll hear a bit more about what you're up to as the evening goes on. And as Stephen has said in the chat, if you aren't learning, you aren't living. And I think it is a learning journey for all of us, this work. And I'm sure there are people in the room who've got much more experience than I have, but certainly, you know, you come across obstacles all the time, and it's great to have a community of change makers who bounce ideas and solutions off. Okay, let's have one more. Who else will tell us why this feels important? Why have you come along this evening? Andy.
Hi, I'm a complete newbie to this, and that's one of the reasons I'm here. I see it's a new network, a new learning community. I often feel, although I think of myself as a good networker, I don't know many people here, so I'm clearly missing out. And although I'm sort of passingly familiar with donut economics, I haven't really devoted the time to it. I often feel that I and my colleagues and other people in the local community, you know, we beaver away on all sorts of projects and activities and pretty small things in faith that they are useful to us and other people in the community, and somehow ripple out to a wider sphere as well. But then sometimes when I get time to reflect, I think, well, what does it add up to a bag of beans? You know, what is the bigger picture? What are the fundamentals? What are the systems underlying what we do, and are usually invisible to us unless we take the time to take a systems analysis point of view. And I'm not all that good at that, so I'm looking for that kind of inspiration and information. Just jotting down now, looking at the things that are going on here, some of which I'm directly involved in, some not, that meet the, I think, Michael, more or less your description of the kind of community layer of your onion. Things that are done in community by each other, mostly informal. We've got 2 car clubs. We've got an e-bike hire share. Got a repair cafe, a larger version of that we call Comhortha, which is a repair and share fair. Thermal cameras available for hire or lend. Food surplus, maker space, tool library, veg bag co-op, swap shop, and seedling swaps. Again, thinking, you know, we don't really join these up very coherently. Maybe we don't need to, but, you know, do they make the sharing economy? What is that? How can we make more of that? I'll just mention one swap shop because people have been saying this week, that's this really good model. It's now just reached its 1000th edition. We really ought to make this more known. I don't think there are many around Britain. It's basically a weekly email, so people subscribe. It never advertises, it spreads by word of mouth. I don't know how many people subscribe because I don't coordinate that, but it's got several hundred. And it's you can tell how long it's going if it's 1,000 editions and every week. So basically during the week, everybody uploads their either offers or wants or events. It's got 3 sections in it onto a web form, and then they appear in our inboxes on a Monday morning. And basically then you contact whoever strikes you as having something that you either want or can get rid of to them without obviously going into the waste economy. And it's very quirky, and you know, sometimes things don't actually shift. Other times it's absolutely fabulous, and you get all sorts of things you would never expect to.
Fantastic. What were the 3 things? Offers, wants, and
Events.
Oh, events. Oh,
Events was added as a 3rd component after about 5 years because people started putting events on willy-nilly, and so they said, right, let's actually use it.
Yeah, I think one of the things, it sounds like you're incredibly busy doing loads of different things, really, really interesting. And one of the things I wonder whether you agree that every community needs is a sort of ecosystem or a platform through which those exchanges can happen and take place. And maybe in some places there are already those established pieces of social infrastructure where those conversations and exchanges can happen. And maybe sometimes it's a reliance on a sort of Facebook community for a local place. But I wonder what work others are doing across Wales to create those networks and connect the dots up in a local community so that partners and stakeholders and people can share their assets and resources and ask each other for help. So I think that sort of networking role is one of the really important things. Thanks, Andy. We'll hopefully hear a bit more about some of your things as the evening goes on. I'll share a few thoughts then to go first, as it were, with some of the stuff that we've been doing through our community rail partnership, which is called South West Wales Connected. So supported by Transport for Wales, we've established a community rail partnership, which we think is about involving people around train stations across the 4 counties of Neath, Talbot, Swansea, Carmarthenshire and Pembrokeshire, in initiatives to enhance placemaking, sense of local place, wellbeing initiatives and community projects around train stations. And we wanted to really get into communities and understand what local people wanted. So this is an interesting piece of work. I think it's interesting because it's not necessarily our local communities, although Swansea train station, I live in central Swansea. We held one of these meetings in Swansea, so I suppose that was on my own doorstep. But we were really keen to start talking to people and organizations in local places about what was important to them. And we came up with this idea of what we called a shared vision meeting. And it's an asset-based community development initiative in that we are trying to bring together the resources, the strengths, the talents, the wealth that exists in local places and see what projects, innovations, ideas, collaborations emerge from the people and organizations in local places. So a few things I'll share and see whether it seems relevant. The first thing that was really important to us was how you invite people and kind of your tone of voice and how you invite people to be part of a shared vision meeting. So we wanted to bring what we think of as the whole system together, so a sort of systems thinking approach. And we were really passionate about the idea that the strength, the value of these meetings will be reflected, you know, in the greatest possible diversity of different people and opinions and perspectives and voices in the room. And so we put out these posters in local places. Pembroke Dock was one of about 6 or 8 local places where we ran these meetings, inviting everyone who lives, works and spends time around the place to come and co-create a shared vision. And we were asking, what would people like to see, what was possible and how could we make it happen? So the language that we used in all our social media posts and going around putting up posters in local shops and cafes, and also using and working with, reaching out to organizations and local businesses within the community to enlist their support in inviting people. And part of actually how we did that was to offer short speaking slots to local organizations and partners to make sure they were really involved and did feel a sense of ownership of these meetings. This whole initiative took place, I should say, during the pandemic. So we were doing all of this online, which was another thing that made it an interesting approach, because I think online meetings, and perhaps other people will share views about this, but online meetings in some ways include people who wouldn't normally come to an in-person meeting, so they can be somehow more inclusive, and then obviously they exclude a whole raft of people who aren't comfortable coming to online things. So you do get a different range of people to an online meeting, and we worked hard to involve organizations who could invite their networks to come and be part of these discussions, so people really felt invited. So I think that's one of the questions: how do you invite people, involve people? One of the principles, I think, of all of this work is radical inclusivity, and providing kind of equal voice and the opportunity to listen to different perspectives from within a community. So getting a wide diversity of people involved is perhaps the first challenge. We designed the conversations around what we think of as generative questions. So we started by asking people, why are you here? Why does this feel important to you? And we've had a bit of that already this evening. And we wanted to take an appreciative inquiry approach. So it's really easy, isn't it, to go into local places and sort of talk about everything that's wrong and have a big kind of moan fest about everything that's problematic and difficult, and particularly in local areas around train stations across our region. You know, these are really some quite neglected places that have really been left to decay, and there's been real underinvestment, not least an underinvestment in the kind of public transport infrastructure. But some of these train stations that you might get off at the train in certain places across our region really feel neglected and unloved. So we really wanted to actually see what people love about their local places, and that is such a more interesting, empowering and inspiring conversation to have. So we asked, what do we love about, let's say, Llanelli? And that was so amazing, actually, to hear people talking about the best bits. And what you find, of course, wherever you go, and this is perhaps obvious, but wherever you go, people really do love their local places. And it's great to hear people really stop and think about the things they really love. And then looking forward to the future, what would you love to see? So again, it's an appreciative inquiry sort of question, not deficit based, but you know, what would you love to see? And then rounding up around what shall we do? And importantly there was, what sort of projects would you like to lead on? And there was differing levels of success in that, which I'm happy to expand upon. But we created these kind of mind maps of the things that people told us in local communities, the things that people would love to see. And it's interesting, the larger the number of people and the broader the diversity of different perspectives, so retired people, people from youth clubs, local businesses, advocates from different community organisations, and sort of special interest groups, local councillors, and the sorts of people who always come to any community meeting, if I can put it like that. So quite a broad range of people. But this, you know, it's always interesting, I have found in my experience, really interesting that the same sorts of themes come up, and that actually I find it's one of those heartwarming things where you realize actually we have so much more in common, that there are many things that we can argue about and disagree on. But when it comes to thinking about our local places, often we can really connect around a shared set of values of the things that are really important to all of us. So it was lovely to hear from diverse groups of people. Sometimes we had about 50 or 60 people on these Zoom calls, the same sorts of themes, and really people connecting around a sort of shared set of values and aspirations. And when we asked about what shall we do, project ideas were created live in the room. So it wasn't as though people came to these meetings with a list already of things that they would like to do, but actually hearing from others. And as the conversation emerged, people were having ideas live on the spot and feeling a sense that they might like to be involved in a subgroup, or saying, oh, you should talk to so-and-so, and connecting the dots with what's already happening. So quite often there are already amazing things happening in communities. So understanding who was doing what, mapping often came up as an idea, that we need to know who's already doing what and sort of map who's involved and who is here. Yeah, so these great mood boards, which not mood boards, these great mind maps that we were able to circulate afterwards, and what we sort of thought of as our list of emerging projects coming out of each of these local places. And then what we were able to do with the support of Transport for Wales and Great Western Railway and some other partners, when we came away from it and thought about how do we actually then empower people to take some of these ideas forward, we launched a small funding pot where we invited participants in these meetings to submit applications to our Changemakers fund, where we could offer sort of little grants of between £300 and £1,000 for people to take their ideas forward. And so we've then gone on to support about 30 or 40 different change-making initiatives in communities around train stations across the region. And a lot of those people and ideas and projects emerged out of or were connected through these shared vision meetings. And it's interesting, in a place, maybe a place like Llanelli, that people haven't been asked before what they would love to see. They haven't had the conversation framed around these generative, positive questions. And there's been a real, there's obviously consultation fatigue. You know, people have been consulted ad nauseum by local authorities and large organizations. But the feedback was really positive about the framing, and people felt inspired and they really enjoyed the meetings. So I just wanted to share that just to seed the discussion, and it was a really interesting piece of work for us and really helped us as a community rail network to start to understand what was going on in local places and to feel like we were starting to unlock some opportunities. And partly what it was about was giving people permission to say, yes, I want to lead a change-making project. And actually, of course, nobody needs any permission. You know, we can all just step up in our own local places and say, we want to do something. But actually, often people don't feel that sense of permission. And so by coming in as an organisation with a couple of logos on our banner from Transport for Wales and sometimes local organisations, and in many of those meetings we invited somebody from the council to come along and talk about what the council was doing in a local place, and that helped to make people feel like they were being invited to or being welcomed to step up and do things and take action. Of course, you have that emerging list of emerging projects, and it's by no means easy then to take any of those things forward. Some projects are easier than others, community events, and some of the kind of green spaces stuff has been easier, not easy, but easier than some of the other things where you need to understand about planning permission and landowners and that sort of thing. But it's been really interesting, and it's an ongoing challenge. The theory of change, I'm being asked in the chat here, if there was a theory of change? What's this question? I think our theory of change is about the conversation is the action. So we really think that creating space for these conversations to happen just creates connections and hopefully invites people to participate in discussions. But yes, that's not a very clear answer. So perhaps I'll have a think about what our theory of change was. Will anyone come in and share anything similar that you've been involved with, or any thoughts emerging from that use of what we call a shared vision meeting? Are there themes there that resonate with work that you've been doing? Does that seem interesting? Can you see how that would work, or any advice for us in going on with those sorts of discussions? Kate Harkus, yes, please.
Hi there. So it's not so local, but I'm a freelance facilitator with Social Enterprise Academy, which is a social enterprise which was established in Scotland, and obviously Scotland is quite far ahead in terms of social enterprise and things like that. But they do a lot of community-led tourism initiatives, so understanding that you can't build for tourists and expect communities to still be there, because that is proving that it's not working, isn't it, at the moment? And so there is a new project which I'm just starting to do, be part of, and again it's looking at bringing communities together to really drive the sort of tourism aspects of it, in terms of making sure that the facilities or the activities or whatever it might be that they're looking to develop have the community at the heart of them. So it's designed and led by the community, and the sort of byproduct or added benefit is that actually it drives tourism to the area. So just looking at all the work that you've done down in Llanelli, and that's why I've asked about the slides, because I also work for the town council here in Ruthin, and there's like that disconnect still. Like, we've got a great building in the middle of town. It's a very new venture for the town council, but we've signed up to become one of an urban rooms network as part of that, to really help drive the town council's sort of place planning initiative of Ruthin Future. So local residents and visitors have the opportunity to feed into sort of consultations on a daily basis, really. So there's some really exciting stuff happening, but it kind of feels like how do we get to that next stage and really get that momentum going and get the community behind it? Because I mean, there's quite a lot of apathy that goes on, isn't there? And quite often it's people who perhaps have moved to an area that's helping drive things forward. And my entire life, even where I was born, I was deemed to be an incomer because of my parentage. Despite having been born and brought up somewhere, doesn't mean that you're local in some people's eyes. And so there's still that element of having to sort of prove yourself or rationalize it and say, right, well, we need to make change, otherwise we're just going to be left behind. And actually that's even worse than where we are at the moment. So yeah, just interested to hear success stories or learning opportunities that people have had because things haven't gone as smoothly, or perhaps little surprises that have gone really well. So yeah, I'm not sure I've really answered your query or your call out for information, but yeah, speaking to, I don't know if anybody knows Gwyn Roberts at Gallery Carnarvon. So that's a really impressive development trust in the town of Carnarvon that's been around for over 3 decades now. But we really, within Social Enterprise Academy, really try and get people to start focusing on their why and their purpose. And so he's like, I think I half hijacked it from Compass/Wales Cooperative Centre, but he's like, after 30 years, I'm beginning to distill it down and all the rest of it. And so he thinks that his why at the moment, or certainly throughout the last 3 decades, was to create sustainable community wealth. And I think that sums it up really well, because the word wealth doesn't necessarily just mean finance, does it? It means the well-being of people, the fact that people feel a part of it and have a purpose. And I think that's just a really great 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-word statement that I think really helps summarize things. So yeah, I don't know whether I did anything, but yeah, there's lots of exciting stuff happening.
Yes, Kate, thank you for that. Yeah, you mentioned this sort of apathy, and I wonder whether apathy is actually a sense of disempowerment. And when we were in Pembroke Dock, that was sort of the most challenging shared vision meeting in a way, because one of the things I get on my kind of inspirational speaker soapbox, and one of the things I say is, you know, the future of our local places is in our hands. You know, what do we want for this community? And the community members sort of shot back at me saying, well, it isn't though, is it? You know, you stood up there and you've said the future of our community is in our hands. Well, it isn't, because we tried to, I think they told us a story about how there had been a community building, an empty building in the community, and it had been disused for ages, and they really rallied a whole effort to try and acquire that building for the community. And that must have been a really passionate, locally led project, but they didn't manage to get the building, and the building was sold off privately in a way that the community didn't support. And so that was sort of heartbreaking. So I think a lot of the work we're trying to do in communities is heal some of the bad practice that's gone on.
But there's also an element where there's ambitions talked about, and sort of that open consultation of trying to say, well, we need to have plans in place to really help progress the town, really, because if we sit around and do nothing is going to change, and effectively it'll go backwards. And so we've got a beautiful square in the middle of Ruthin, but it's really full of cars. It's just a sea of tarmac, and it's one of the most picturesque squares in North Wales. And there's local business people saying, yeah, but we can't stop traffic coming through because people live there and there's businesses. And it's like, well, that's fine, but it's not pedestrian friendly, it's just car friendly. It's of no use to anybody other than people wanting a shortcut through town. And oh, but we can't change it. Well, we can, but we need to trial these things, and well, it won't work. Oh, okay, right. And but yeah, as you say, if things have tried to happen and it hasn't happened, or oh, we tried it 30 years ago and it didn't work, and you're like, okay, yeah, that's fine, but we need to try again. So yeah, anyway.
Yes, really challenging when you've got those voices in the room. And I think you know, you're a facilitator as well, Kate, so it's figuring out the kind of phrases and turns of phrase to use to keep those people engaged in thinking about the art of the possible and what they would love to see, rather than all the things. It's easy, isn't it, to have a conversation about what won't work and what has never worked. Much more challenging to have a conversation about possibility and potential. Zoe, you come in?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think you have to just keep telling positive stories and examples and inspiring rhetoric all the time, whereas there's so much negativity that's thrown down our throats if you read the papers or the television. And actually, even, you know, in the half an hour that we've been talking, so many inspiring stories that just need to be shared across Welsh communities, that people will feel empowered to go, wow, I never thought of doing that. That's great. Yeah, I'd love to be able to do that. Well, can I do that? Like, oh, I might try and give it a go. And I think that's, you know, hearing what other communities are doing is a really important part of this.
And finding or inviting those people who are doing really inspiring things locally, isn't it? And encouraging people to tell their story in a community meeting. Storytelling is inspiring, isn't it? But also, you know, when you hear about that local social enterprise that's done this great thing on your doorstep, that can really energize. Absolutely right.
Margot had her hand up, Dawn.
Margot.
You've made me decide I should say something about another small project that has made my last year, and that's called the Women's Shed. Our local CSA farm, we have 4 or 5 community supported agriculture farms around Swansea, but one of them has a flower grower named Lizzie, who is really passionate about wanting to involve women in green and healthy activities. And so she had the idea of starting a women's shed once a week and inviting anybody who wanted to come to help her with her flower growing. So it's, you know, weeding and deadheading and seeds and the rest. She's managed to find an awful lot of people who have a lot of very different reasons for being there. And when you kneel on a row and weed for half an hour, the stories start to come out. And the networking that now goes on amongst the 20 or 30 people who don't come every week, but come regularly, is terrific. And the intergenerational exchange of recipes is beginning to happen now too, because younger ones who've never baked before are having a go, because some of us older ones do it and bring stuff, and it usually works, doesn't always. So I'm advocating women's sheds for any of the growing community things that you've got going.
Great, and I think you've raised a really important thing about, you know, the well-being benefits of connecting in nature, isn't it? And the combination of being together with people, real human beings, and chatting to each other over, you know, being in nature, being in green spaces. Vicky, I'm hoping you'll put your hand up and tell us a little bit about what you're up to in Pembrokeshire, and a lot of your work at Group Resilience is about helping people overcome their sort of mental health and well-being challenges and connecting around green spaces and growing projects. Will you talk a little bit about what works for you or what's been challenging in your work so far?
Sorry, same thing. I think you've already. Sorry. Oh, hold on.
That's okay. That's okay. I've obviously put you on the spot. We can come back to you when you're ready, Vicky. Anybody else want to come in and reflect on any of that or share anything that you've been involved with?
Yes.
Yes, Michael. Yeah.
I have a couple of, one of the thoughts that's buzzing through my mind is, was Andy Middleton on this forum middle of last year? And I said at the end of his thing about joining all the little food co-ops, why don't we build an edible linear park from Amlwch to Chepstow, back to St David's and up to St Asaph and so forth. Now, Kate, who's just been talking from Ruthin. So I suggested in that process that might come down the Vale of Clwyd and come back to Barmouth and so forth. So it's a sort of joining up the dots all across Wales. So we're all working the same project. Now, what I've spent the last 2 days going through, because I'm also interested in getting the Carnarvon-Bangor Railway rebuilt. I used to be a member of the Aberystwyth Carmarthen Translate Cymru Railway. Now, that to my mind is a complete disaster. That's £900 million worth of nonsense at £24 million a mile. What I'm proposing in Carnarvon is very light narrow gauge, which we can build ourselves for £1 million a mile. Now, so what I've been looking at on the last 2 days is, what if we took all the rural railways of Wales, the Mid Wales line, the Oswestry line, the Pwllheli, Cambrian coastline, so forth, the Conwy Valley, and turned them all into narrow gauge, so you can run cycle track beside them. They then become the linear green corridors that I was talking about in that meeting before. So you've got the cycle route, the railway, and it. So in terms of your railway stations are disempowered places and so forth, you would then be the focus to that all Wales network. So what I'm looking at specifically on Anglesey and then back into Gwynedd is the way that you braid the cycle track and the railway, because you're building the Forest of Wales at the same time, because you're building the edible corridor that I talked about before. So the tram is carrying the fresh vegetables into town, so that the station becomes the unloading point of the vitality of the community, you know? So that idea that agriculture and tourism and community are all becoming the same thing, you can't discern between, because now the interesting thing to me is that the railway is the economic project, the cycle route is the ethical, non-hierarchical car project, and the edible greenway is the ecological project. So those three rings that I'm always playing together. So what intrigued me about all the presentations that you put up on your railway stations was that you weren't using the filters that you said were the three pillars of this process. So if I jump back now to the things I talked about before, the 3 E's, ethics, ecology, economics, and the 5 levels of C, cluster with a community ring around it, with a county ring around it, with a, you know, it's getting less and less interesting to you because you want everything to happen in community. So each of the other people spoke about community being, we've got to do it, we've got it now. The thing I didn't mention that joins those two together is a community forum. And the original document I wrote 30-something years ago that became the progenitor of the Future Generations Act said you form one community forum, and it is every single member of the community. There's no chairperson. You live in that community, you are in that committee, you are the deciding factor in the governance of your community. But you then form 3 subcommittees that are ethics, ecology, economics. So somebody says, I want to start a bakery. It then goes to all 3 committees. So all those projects that you had lined up for the railway stations and empowering Swansea and so forth would go to all 3 committees. The group of people who are excited about the environment, the biodiversity, you know, the changes in agriculture, discuss only its value to the integration of our relationship with nature. The ethical group look at the elderly, education for children. What is this doing to empower us? How are we all as a community coming together because we're starting a bakery? Is it going to be running as a training operation? You know, is it going to be, you know, so the economics group then look at which farm's going to grow the wheat? Who's going to do the deliveries? How do you get all the funding? Is it all going to be done by local people? Or, you know, so your 3 committees are working together. If it passes through all 3, it's gone straight through the center of the Venn diagram. You do it. Who the hell is going to stop you? And you run that through a let scheme which says, we set it up. You know, the plasterer comes in and does the work, but he's paid in bread down the road. You know, it's all done on the let scheme. You don't need to wait. So who's this chap? Clive was saying, we've just got to dive in and do it. You can set up the systems to do it if you understand the parameters within which you're doing it, which are ethics, ecology, and economics. Now, as economics goes out the window, because we're dealing more and more with gift economy, let's economy, and so forth, that E is replaced by empowerment. And everything is done for the good of the individual, for the raising of the spirit, for finding those people who are not understanding what's going on and enabling them to come forward. It's about compassion, it's about caring. So community is about building all these things because you have the tools to do it. And that enables us to be entirely enthusiastic and, you know, to focus energy and so forth. And it's that sort of, so those are the kinds of projects I'm looking for, like the integration of linear greenway, cycle route, railway, forest. So it's all one project. And if you could do that across Wales, then you arrive in a new community, you set them up with a community forum, and they're based at the railway station, on you go. You know, you can't stop when you start this sort of thing. Enough.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, well, I'd love to see that, you know, yeah, I mean, it's inspiring, isn't it? But there are different structures and models that how do we actually make that happen on the ground? And who's doing innovative, interesting, or not innovative stuff that we've known how to do for 3 decades or more. Let's hear about the actual practice of people making this stuff real in places across Wales. Vicky, are you ready to come in?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I got rid of the other meeting. Yeah, it's so hard to know where to start. I mean, we in Group Resilience were given quite a lot of money, but we've also achieved a huge amount. I think looking ahead that we need to form coalitions and alliances and partnerships with other organisations, because that's the way to go, and because otherwise the burden is too great. But one of the things we were focused on was finding land for communities to garden on and to build themselves on. And we have a particularly shiny example in a main town of the county, where growers have been waiting for 10 years, giving up, getting old, never thinking their dream would ever come to fruition. But a group of farmers gave us, they didn't give us, they made available 1 1/3 acres in a really convenient place. So that's fantastic. And that's since April, the growers have been hard at it, creating their own world there. They started with virtually no money. I was worried about that. I thought if it'll fail without money, they said, no, we want to have fun. We want to try. So they've been doing it very much on a DIY basis, formed their own organisation with my encouragement. And so they run things themselves. And they just never dreamt they'd be managing company directors. They thought they're just going to get a garden, but they're doing really well. And it's another garden trying to start as well. And I've just been working today on a garden in the poorest area of Pembrokeshire, which is saying something. It's in Moncton, which will be very small, but it's a start. We're hoping to get that going with a bit of funding in August. So that's one sort of thread, but it's really also to do with talking to people who have the issues, whether it's mental health, giving them the strength to take leadership. And that's one of the reasons there's been a search for land, because they've found that one of the things they needed. And then another thread, as you probably know, is just trying to get everyone to talk to each other like you're doing here, which is brilliant. But in the health and wellbeing sector, there's many projects and strands, and they're all going in the same sort of direction, but they need to be brought together into a kind of coalition. So we had a really good meeting, bringing everyone together at Jim Bowen's place, which is a care farm, and he's a very respected project leader really, and so that worked well. So that's the sort of things we're trying to do, and we're very pleased that Dawn is the director, and there is so much more that we can do. We put on a zero carbon like trade show really, with all the businesses and organisations who contribute to it, whether it's sort of natural building or renewable energy or cycling or lift sharing or different natural decorating, sort of various different organisations who came together in a trade show, and we had meetings throughout it. It could have been better attended, but we did bring people who don't normally come to these things to it, particularly people with mental health challenges, and they helped to run it. And these are people who have fallen out with society. They're not people who are in care situations. They're powerful individuals who fought against the norm and got damaged, and are just looking for an opportunity to shape society to make it more sane. And it's not surprising any sane person will be driven mad by the way things are. So we're kind of cutting across different sectors and bringing them together as best we can. So that's all positive stuff. We want to work with the county council to create a zero carbon county from the ground up, and that's an aspiration which hasn't really found its way forward yet. hoping to take that forward in the autumn. I think that's enough scattergun vision.
Yes, thanks, Vicky. Yeah, I've only recently become involved with group and really inspired by all the things that you're making happen. And part of that has been, you know, bringing farmers together and thinking about the food system and relocalizing food networks. But I'm interested in how, you know, how do we find and empower people within local places who can then take leadership of these projects? Because I think some of us find ourselves burning out really, or feeling really exhausted, that, you know, that there's so much to do, and everyone can come up with loads of ideas of what should happen, but how do we make sure we're not left holding the project at the end of the day, that we're not left being the ones who actually have to make it happen, but that we can find that leadership within communities or local places? Really interested in insights or advice around that. Vicky?
Yeah, that's really important, and there's no simple one off the shelf answer, but I tend to look for the people who are angry, and because they're frustrated, because part of their anger is because they want to do so much more and they have no power, and you just use your networks and resources and skills to empower them and make sure they've got friends and allies in a group, and that can work a magic if you can do that. That's one suggestion. There probably are many others.
Oh, that's a great one. Yeah, find the angry people. Zoe?
Yeah, I think as well that there are pearls out there. You have to find the pearls that are working within businesses, like you mentioned, Dawn, that they're, you know, we're all full of ideas, and there will be people sitting at home with a cup of tea and a biscuit or a glass of wine and are bursting with ideas, but don't realize that there are probably other people down the road that are thinking the same thing about their community and their environment. And it's finding those pearls. You have to go into the community, like go in, like really into hyperlocal, and have different conversations, get involved in other community events and things like that, whatever it may be, and find those pearls and match people up. Because when people, like-minded people, come together, they might be from completely different businesses or completely different organizations, really random, maybe big corporates, and somebody who's retired, and when they realize that they've got that shared sense of purpose, they will take it on board, and then that sense of pride then that they've made that happen. So it's finding the pearls, I think.
Yes, great. And Zoe's mentioned businesses there, and I think with, you know, small businesses within local places, or even larger businesses that local people work for, really interested in how we can tap into the resources of embedded businesses in all of this as well. So it's not, and I mean, that's the economics piece to some extent, but also businesses have resources and wealth and assets that they can share with communities if they're brought into these conversations as well. And it's finding those people within businesses that want to engage with their local places in that way. Stephen?
That was quite a cue for me, Dawn, thank you. So just a little story in Abergavenny. My business is in Abergavenny, and to answer the question about how you kind of break the seal and then start getting things off the ground. So I, off the back of, I've got a small consultancy business. You know, we have some great clients all around the world and some in Wales. Got hit by COVID like anybody else did. We're in various office spaces around Monmouthshire. Came out of office space, worked all virtual for a while, and then knocked on the door of a shared workspace in Neville Street in Abergavenny called Gwaggle. Gwaggle, run by Owen Davis, who's essentially a very innovative, very sustainable urban development planner. So he runs his own consultancy, and he said to himself before COVID, actually, how can I understand what urban development planning should be sustainably without living in the community, doing something in the community to understand who works there? So he said, I'm going to create a shared workspace in Abergavenny, and he didn't buy the place, but he rented from a landlord a kind of fairly regular, slightly I wouldn't call it dilapidated, nice enough building, but kind of odd shaped rooms off each other, up a couple of stairways. Got maybe 20 desks, couple of rooms that he had various relationships with, and that was kind of working well. And he was using it for his own office space. And then he said to me, we'd then taken 3 or 4 desks in there, and we were growing. And he said, Stephen, I've got an idea for another space. I know where the bodies are buried as far as kind of grants are concerned, and there's loads of grants available for community-based working environments. And I've got a landlord who has got a couple of floors above a cafe at the bottom end of Abergavenny, which have been empty for 4 years. I can't really take the 2 floors on as Gwaggle, but are you interested in one of them as an anchor tenant? So to cut that long story short, I'm now at the bottom of the high street in Abergavenny with the floor to ourselves as an office, still as a shared space principle, renting from Owen, who runs Gwaggle now on 2 floors with probably the best office space in Abergavenny, having been funded through a community-inspired initiative with a landlord who's been in the local area for a while, who's now been able to utilize this space. It's been dead for 4 years. And interestingly, the floor we are now on has not been inhabited for 150 years. So there's a real community story, and Owen's got a kind of timeline of 150 years of the property inside the building. So what I'm going to say is, to answer what do you need to break the seal? Well, Owen's got expertise. So I think you do need some skills, I think, somewhere. You need some inspiration. and Owen, was committed and inspired. But the network about the relationship with landlords, the relationship with a good council interested in supporting the grant, albeit going through governance. He was able to engage with the business community, which is me and others in it as well. And this is happening at the same time as that part of Abergavenny is kind of become a bit of a cafe culture. And you wouldn't have imagined that only 9 months ago. So COVID's kind of inspired a bunch of outdoor cafes there. So I think that as has been said in the chat, there's no straightforward answer. But this is not just about the kind of bubble of passion people on this call here. This is about, it's amazing the doors that can be opened if you nudge the right people and have the right conversation. So I think we can all have this kind of cooperative conversation with others. I think having some skills amongst the team that they kind of knows how to nudge the window open is really helpful. But I think that little story there has a lot of moving parts in it, and persistence helps as well, I guess.
Oh, persistence is key. Absolutely. Yeah. So really interesting. Yeah, I think all those empty buildings in the heart of our communities are such an asset that needs to be brought back into beneficial use. So those kind of co-working spaces are a great model, aren't they? And there's a project being led by Urban Foundry in Swansea called Pop-Up Wales, which is trying to get hold of these empty buildings, which landlords are just leaving to rot because they don't see the value in renovating them, and making the pitch to those landlords and de-risking it for the landlords to take them on these kind of low rents, peppercorn rents, and get projects and startup businesses and local companies into those spaces. And as you've described there with the kind of emerging cafe culture, it just takes a bit of co-location of a few people with ideas who are crying out, entrepreneurs and small businesses crying out for space and looking around them, feeling sick of all these empty buildings. So there's a real opportunity there, and be interesting to see different examples emerging over time about how communities have been able to lead the way in bringing these buildings and assets into beneficial use. Thanks for that, Stephen. That's an inspiring example. I will come to Michael in the absence of any other waving hands, but I'd love to hear from those of you who haven't spoken up yet about some of your
Please,
work.
Everybody else must speak before I do.
Okay, well, look, we've prompted David to come in now. So David Williams, let's hear from you.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Dawn. Yeah, just picking up on the last point, really, because I've been involved with for quite a few years with Llais, which is the umbrella body for community woodlands in Wales. So we took on the lease of what's now the forestry hub in Machynlleth, and very much looking to link and network different organisations for sort of shared office space, some small businesses, some more entrepreneurial, people like the Woodland Trust and Coed Cymru. So it was meant to be done on a partnership basis with Welsh Government, but it's probably fair to say that we've done all the running to get the people. But yeah, and I think that there is a real value then in being able to have that kind of shared space and that opportunity network, though obviously that's been significantly affected by COVID. I think the other thing, and others have made the point, it's actually trying to look at finding that coalition of like-minded people and points of common interest where people can connect and work together. I'm in the fortunate position perhaps of having recently been elected to local council in the May elections, in an area that I've not lived in for a very long time, but still in Cumbran, where I lived before, but different part of the town. So it's been quite interesting to find out what groups there are and make some of the connections between the groups. And I see that the role for a councillor is very much to be that facilitator and connector to make sure that, because you'll hear these different things. Oh, hang on, now maybe a connection there with the museum, the archives, the point that was made about green trails, the use of cycle routes, but again, it's actually trying to there's no way that I or anybody else can try and do everything, but what you can try and do is make sure that you're putting people in touch to have the connections and conversations so that there can be a coalescence around an idea that a few people can run with.
Yes, David, I agree. That's absolutely key, isn't it? The nurturing of the ecosystem, the connecting people, which, coming back to Stephen's point about the skills that we need, that is one of the skills that's needed, isn't it? The connectors that can introduce people and see the connections between what different people are trying to do. And I think of that kind of network as being an empowering piece of infrastructure in a local place. And I suppose in different places, different organizations or people sort of play that role. And there's a question in the chat, and I invite anyone that knows about development trusts, but I suppose there are different structures and ways of trying to make change happen in communities, but I love the kind of organic nature of the community-led stuff that just comes out of somebody having a conversation and then being connected with someone else that's like-minded, and how can we make that happen at scale? Right, Michael still got his hands up. Anybody else want to come in before I invite Michael to respond and share thoughts on some of this? Okay, you're up, Michael.
3, 2, 1. Well, what I was going to say referred to that, how do we break the mold? And I think we're about to be deluged by 2 very specific things, but I'll come back to that because the conversation that's just developed about the integration, the ecology within community and so forth. I started a project 42 years ago called the Greenhouse for growing people and growing projects. And the critical thing about it was that nobody had any money. I was unemployed. I went to the bank and I said, I need to borrow the money to buy this building. I just sort of outright, it had a lot of space, so go out and buy it. We're the people who are going to do it up. He said, how are you going to pay off your mortgage? And I said, you're a bank. And he said, who's going to pay the bank insurance? I said, you're the bank. I came out with 110% mortgage after talking to him for 20 minutes, because I said, tomorrow, 300 people are going to move into that building and repaint it, rewire it. Your profit is going to go up so fast, you just don't know what's hit you. Now, the other aspect of this is that all those people were homeless in the sense that their projects couldn't afford space. Collectively, we paid £2 or £3 a week. The women's group said, our business is rate crisis and so forth. We are not putting money into profit. So the rest of us said, don't. Have a room. It's free. It's your building. You do what you need to. And if you don't work as community to do exactly what each person needs to do, you're missing the point of how you love and share and communicate. Now, the point of buying a big building cheaply is that we had 12 resident groups, British Trust for Conservation Volunteers, Animal Rights, Health Information, and we had about 30 groups passing through group membership rooms with carpets on the floor and futons hanging on the walls and things and so forth. So the throughput was enormous. We had pro-life and pro-abortion in the same building because they needed a meeting room, they needed a telephone, they needed a photocopier, they needed a toilet. We just provided facility collectively. Nobody owned it. If you walked through the door, you became the owner because it was an ethical community participation project. Yeah. So everybody could use it. And the beauty of this is the cross-fertilization under that roof is phenomenal. So you're not looking for the 3 people who can pay for it and say, right now we've got a project. You're looking for the 300 people who can't pay for it, because together you begin to find all the ideas. You've enabled the, that ambience that simply says, wow, I never knew that was going to happen. Oh, I've just met so-and-so. Yeah, it's absolutely terrific. Now, those kinds of things just constantly happen in my life. And the bit I was going to talk about before, to pick up the previous theme, was that there are 2 very significant things that are happening right now. One is that the world is changing direction, whether we like it or not. It's called the Great Awakening. It's called the Decade of Transition. It's called, we can't stop it. So very soon, the world is waking up to go, wow, it's like the food chain just collapsed and now we're all growing vegetables. It's like cars can't be produced anymore because they haven't got any chips because so now we're all walking and cycling. We all got a taste of it in 2020. It's just about to roll back. But the other aspect of why this is working is that there's a generation sneaking through underneath us. Most of us are of an age, if I sort of look around the screens here, there are all the people with whom I'm having really empowering conversations at the moment are between 34 and 38. There's a 38-year-old who's decided that her community will grow. So she's met every headmaster, every councillor. She's gone to the local authority and found all the unused land. She's got a polytel set up in every school. She's developing, growing, all on a Todd. When she comes home, she takes a cello, sits in her allotment, plays to her plants, and it's just, there's nothing will stop her being in love with the process of vegetables. Nothing will stop that generation. Now, there are 2 projects going on in South Wales that are of this ilk. One is called Crops Not Shops. Anyone heard of it?
No.
These are the anarchists. These are people who say, I don't give a damn who owns the land. Outside these council houses, there's green space. We're going to knock on every door, get all the kids out, get them planting carrots. We're going to set up a massage tent. We're going to set up a music tent. We're going to bring food to share. They do community for one day to get everybody out the street planting. They don't ask anybody. They just do it. And they're called Crops Not Shops. The other group is called Community. I can't find a single person in North Wales to talk to about it, but places like Bridgend, they're part.
Oh.
Exactly the same thing. Yeah. So one group's called Community, the other's called Crops Not Shops, and these are all young people. These are 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds who are just saying, I don't know what the fuck is going on in the world. It's just, we need to make it work. Let's go out and make it work,
Yeah,
So,
I mean, really inspiring examples. And I think that's absolutely right, that there is there's a wave of community activists, change makers, people taking, purpose driven, really great leadership coming through. But one of the things, exactly as you've described, often those young social entrepreneurs, or whatever you want to call them, the thing they haven't got is the money or the land or the property, and those things are held by the kind of entrenched power systems, whether that's government or councils or big businesses or older people, and how can we enable more of those younger generation of change makers? How can we give them the things that just as you say, the space they need, and then the cross-fertilization of ideas and opportunities just begins to happen. Really exciting. Thank you for that. Andy, I don't know whether you want to share a bit more with us. We were interested to hear about all the various projects that EcoW are involved with, and how do you get local people involved? How do you make sure things are sort of community or locally led, and do you struggle to find people to kind of take these projects on and run with them?
Sometimes yes and no. I mean, what some of these things just seem to emerge. Currently, the most energy around that I can see in the creation phase is to create a voluntary run community run youth club. The county council took them all away about 8 or 9 years ago, I think, and prompted partly by a spate of local vandalism and drinking and that kind of thing. People came together, and mostly around in the community garden space, so there was concern about the space as well as young people's safety. Suddenly, whole people got energy around this and started listening to the young people about why, and the frustrations and the anger and the lack of facilities, and have done something about it. And although it's not all in place yet, it almost is. Suddenly, almost within a space of 6 or 7 weeks, there's going to be a voluntary run youth club. So that's fantastic when that sort of spontaneity happens. Other times it's much harder work, and sometimes it's difficult to sustain things beyond that sort of initiation stage, because there's lots of people around here who are ideas people and instigators, and you don't always get the stickers and the doers and those who are prepared to kind of make it continue. So I mean, we do have a community forum around here. As somebody said earlier, what we need is, basically to bring these things together. It's just for reforming another phase of it now. I'm old enough, unfortunately, to have seen several phases of this. One through Communities First. How many people remember that? We had one of those, and then community forum. Well, the latest version of that, we are kind of facilitating, because we've got some money from this UK government community renewal fund. I know that Vicky's had a slice of that, maybe some other people have as well. It's a bit of a strange beast, but anyway, it's given us the capacity to create a network, still informal. It brings together the town and community council in the patch. So there are 9, and communication with them has traditionally been rather poor, and sometimes a little bit adversarial between the town and the kind of catchment area, the hinterland. But not just for them, but also wider civic society, some representatives of organisations, and some just basically individuals, but coming together around the cause, which is to basically instigate conversations about the future, about people's needs, to create an evidence base through which various entities, whoever, can draw on that and make applications for funding where funding is required, but sometimes it isn't. So it doesn't have a coherent vision yet. It's kind of starting again. So one of our challenges is, as you were referring to earlier, the syndrome of sort of cynicism that comes out of too much of this talking shop has been going on, and we've heard it all before, and what came out of it last time. Well, fortunately, we do have some success stories around here that we can point to, but it is that part of our challenge is to avoid people thinking, oh, it's just a talking shop. Premises is one of our problems. Talking about the greenhouse, Michael, was that in Bangor, the greenhouse? Am I remembering that right?
Yes.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah.
Well, I was nowhere near it. I remember it happening. So here, partly because of the topography of Machynlleth, I'm talking about here primarily, constrained topographically. So one of our needs is for access to growing land. And there's a scarcity of that that's anywhere near the residential areas just because of the nature of the topography, really, and competes with housing land as well, which is the need for more affordable housing. So yeah, but also in buildings, you know, we need a greenhouse. There are redundant buildings, and we are trying to get hold of them. The one we're focusing on at the moment is a former bank. NatWest Bank closed, what was it, 4 years ago, and sat there since. They still hold the lease. There's another 2.5 to 3 years on their lease that they hold, and nothing's happening. So we have persuaded the agent to consult their instructor, who is NatWest, and so the proposition will be, right, we can at least take the financial burden off you, because you are no doubt paying the council tax attracted by the redundant, the not unused building at the moment. So we can save you that money if you give it to us on a peppercorn rent. So we'll see. And if we do, that'll unlock, I think, another set of some of the initiatives I mentioned earlier. Some of them are in need of premises. Yeah, so just to take one of those, your question about, you know, the individuals, the volunteers, the food share, sorry, the food surplus initiative is again recently initiated. We do have successful initiatives in Aberystwyth and a little bit further away, Newtown, and also there's one in Tywyn, the community fridge model. We haven't got one in Machynlleth yet, but there is now a grouping wanting to do it. And it's just got to that point where we've settled on our aims and our vision, and they've got a constitution. We're just about to talk to the key businesses about their perceptions. But I can see we're just about to get to the step where we have to ask ourselves, right, okay, who actually wants to do this, to be the volunteers? And we'll see, really, yeah, how much enthusiasm can we generate? We have to go beyond the usual circle of those who turn up and discuss this kind of good idea and speak from good intentions. Some of us come along saying, right, okay, I'm happy to get this going, but you know, I know I haven't got the capacity to be the volunteer who turns out 3 times a week to go and pop round to the co-op and load up with all this stuff and then open up a pop-up shop. So we need the next wave of volunteers. So that's when push will come to shove.
Yes, lots of great insights. Thank you, Andy. And it sounds like a lot of the work you're doing is removing the obstacles for projects and people. And I think that is interesting about, I think every change-making project or initiative, it really does need a leader to be the one with the persistence to keep driving it forward and pushing it forward. So I've started making sure I say that when I'm in community meetings and you know, opportunities to just talk to local people who perhaps the perception out there in the world is that other people are taking, it's like somebody else's job, or somebody else is doing it, or there's, you know, someone else, they will do it, or they should do it. And we had an interesting response at a recent meeting. We were running a little hyperlocal transport solutions project where we were going into local communities around Swansea, inviting people to come and talk about their hyperlocal transport challenges. And there was this one guy that was talking quite a lot about how he can't ever go out in the evening because he hasn't got transport to get home again and things like that. And I said in that meeting, you know, if anybody here would like to lead on a project, even if you've never done anything like this before, but if you're passionate about something and with our help, you feel like you could, you know, lead on something, every project needs a leader, and could it be you? And actually he did then submit an application to our project to say he would like to create this sort of community-led night bus project idea. So I think sometimes really being explicit about the invitation for people to step up and lead projects and initiatives. You know, are we really making sure people know they have the permission? That we know they don't need any permission, but I think we need to make that really explicit and inviting people to step up and lead things rather than feeling like they shouldn't put themselves forward, or they haven't got the experience or the skills. Once people know how much they are needed, I wonder whether that is part of the messaging. I'm looking at the time and I feel like we've only just got started and there's loads to talk about, but I also recognise that we said the meeting would run till 8:30, and some of you have kept very quiet or have put more in the chat than you have spoken out loud. So I really appreciate that. There's lots of insightful comment coming through in the chat as well. Our ambition with these Wellbeing Economy Wales forums is to seed these conversations, connect people, and create that learning opportunity, knowledge sharing opportunity. So I hope this evening has been interesting and useful to partners and colleagues in the room, and given you some food for thought. Yes, I can see. Thanks,
Tom.
Zoe. Tom
wants to make a closing comment, obviously.
Yes, Tom.
It was partly an apology for lurking silently for the last hour, but I've literally just had to come in and make dinner, and now I'm doing the washing up. But it's been a lovely inspirational background noise to my task. So sorry, I haven't sort of really engaged or contributed very much, but it's always inspirational and there's firing little ideas. So thank you.
Nice feedback. Thank you for saying that, Tom. It's been good to have you with us. Clive, is that a wave or a hand up? Yes, please.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, big time apologies. I had a bit of a computer outage. So I lost a good 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes. But yeah, for the most part, this was an exercise for listening rather than speaking. But I am sorry I wasn't able to contribute a little bit more. But lovely to hear from everybody.
Great. Well, join us again and share more about what you're doing at Focus Where. It's really another exciting change-making initiative, community-led, locally led. Margot.
I'd just like to give a very warm welcome to Doug Wartz, who's joined us from Toronto. In the way of these small world connections, he and I know the same gal, Jenny, who's done some really fabulous tourism research, place-based tourism research, and she connected us, and I'm delighted that Toronto has come in tonight. So, you know, maybe we can encourage a few other people from other places to come and listen and share too.
Yes, thanks, Douglas, for flying all the way over here to Wales for this discussion. And it's great to be part of this international network that we can make those connections. Has it been interesting from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved in sustainability work for a long time, but my background is in culture, in museums, and I have been fighting for a greater sense that museums become catalysts of cultural change and adaptation in a changing world, as opposed to a center for leisure time activities. And it's a tough road to go down. It's a conservative field, and anyway, I think there's enormous potential. And so what I get from what you're doing there, working at the grassroots level, is that it's incredibly powerful. I'm still very conscious of the big systems that dominate so much of the trends that are destroying the planet. And I think there does need to be some theories of change behind some of these to try and increase their impacts and to clarify their impacts. And I'm thrilled that that we all exist. And I understand a new initiative has happened in Canada through the David Suzuki Foundation. And one meeting was canceled. The one meeting that I've heard of was canceled. So we'll see where it goes. So I'm hoping we can catch up.
Oh, great. Yes, brilliant. Lovely to have you here, and for Canada to be engaged in the Wellbeing Economy Alliance as well. So let's keep in touch on all of that. Great. Well, thank you all for taking time this evening to come and join us. These conversations happen on a monthly basis, but we're not meeting next month because it's August, and hopefully some of us will be having some time off. but we're reconvening in September to bring together climate action groups from across Wales to share information. Very much like a few months ago, we had a food conversation and heard from lots of different local food initiatives across Wales. So again, trying to connect the dots of great things that people are doing. And then in October, we're talking about businesses building the wellbeing economy in Wales. So that will be a different but equally interesting discussion. So please do stay connected with us and hopefully see you at another one of these meetings sometime soon. But do enjoy the summer, and we'll see you again at the next event in September. Bye for now, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.